Lamentations 1, verses 1 through 5. How deserted lies the city, once so full of people. How like a widow is she, who once was great among the nations. She who was queen among the provinces has now become a slave. Bitterly she weeps at night, tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers there is no one to comfort her. All her friends have betrayed her, they have become her enemies. After affliction and harsh labor, Judah has gone into exile. She dwells among the nations, she finds no resting place. All who pursue her have overtaken her in the midst of her distress. The roads to Zion mourn, for no one comes to her appointed festivals. All her gateways are desolate, her priests groan, her young women grieve, and she is in bitter anguish. Her foes have become her masters, her enemies are at ease. The Lord has brought her grief because of her many sins. Her children have gone into exile, captive before the foe. The writer continues to describe the city of Jerusalem as a living, breathing one. In verse 2, her lovers and friends aren't romantic partners. In the political context of the Bible, these are neighboring nations like Egypt that Jerusalem made alliances with instead of trusting God. When Babylon attacked, those allies abandoned her. Zion is another name for Jerusalem, specifically the hill where the temple stood. The author says the physical roads are mourning because the city used to be packed with joyous crowds traveling for the annual religious festivals like Passover. Now the gates are completely empty. This is a critical turning point in the chapter. Up until verse 5, the poem is just describing what happened, the sadness, the loneliness. But in verse 5, the author tells us why it happened. The Lord has brought her grief because of her many sins. Even in the middle of terrible tragedy, the writer acknowledges that God is just and that the people's rebellion led to this consequence. Not everyone in Zion, Jerusalem, was a bad person. In fact, some of the most famous heroes of the Bible lived through this exact tragedy. The prophet Jeremiah, who is traditionally believed to have written Lamentations, was deeply faithful to God. Young men like Daniel and Ezekiel were also living in Jerusalem at this time, and they were taken into exile despite being very faithful and good people. So why did the good people have to suffer and go into exile too? Why is that fair? In our modern world, we highly value the individual. If one person commits a crime, only that person goes to jail. But in the ancient Middle East, people viewed themselves collectively as a corporate whole, a family, a tribe, or a nation. When God made a covenant, a binding agreement or treaty with the Israelites back at Mount Sinai, he made it with the entire nation, not just individuals. The agreement was that if the nation followed God, the nation would be protected. If the nation's leaders and the vast majority of the people turned away and worshipped other gods, the nation would lose its protection. Because the leadership and the culture had become thoroughly corrupt, the consequences fell on the whole society. When a city is besieged by a foreign army, the walls don't only fall on the wicked. When the food supply is cut off, the righteous starve right alongside the corrupt. The Bible doesn't shy away from the harsh reality that the innocent often suffer because of the sins of others. The author of Lamentations is actually a perfect example of this. He is weeping and suffering through the destruction of his home, even though he spent years trying to change the people to their ways. Even though the good people had to endure the physical suffering of the exile, the Bible emphasizes that God did not abandon them. God used this tragedy to preserve a remnant, a small group of faithful people who would carry on the faith. For example, when Daniel was taken into exile in Babylon, God was with him, protected him, and elevated him to a high position to help his people.